Hey, I'm Two-Headed Deer, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make this kind of sound with very little time and effort of your own. Things sound metallic when they have a bunch of harmonically unrelated resonances. Most hi-hat sound design tutorials know this, but they tell you to set this up manually with an EQ, kind of like this. You'll take white noise and you just sort of make a bunch of resonances and then add an envelope. And this works, but the problem is that everything that comes out of this specific configuration is going to sound the same until you move these bands around. And manually moving them around is kind of mind-numbingly uninteresting, uncreative, and tedious. And this is just a core issue with manually designing hi-hats at all. The advantage of the approach I'm going to demonstrate in this video is that it's really fast and it's really low effort because it's automated, and it's spontaneous enough to generate interesting results, but still ultimately gives you some measure of control over the output based on how you adjust the input. The basic approach is this. We're going to run white noise through a bunch of randomly moving resonant peaks and dips, render out a large chunk of that audio, and put it into a sampler, where we're going to randomize the start position, thus giving each hit a distinct spectral profile. We're not chasing realism here. These are obviously fake digital sounds. The object is just to get interesting results. So we're going to take our white noise and we're going to filter it. I'm going to be using this plugin called MORPH EQ, which is very important for a specific reason. It's an EQ, but what's unique about this plugin is that you can draw paths for each filter in the plugin. And then the morph knob will sort of fluidly move each point in the EQ along its path. What I've got set up here is 3 instances of morph EQ, each with a couple peaks and a couple valleys, that kind of just go all over the place over the travel of the morph knob. Forgive my frame rate. This computer just hates being alive. There. You could do this all in one instance of morph EQ, but I have them split because when we start randomizing these knobs, having multiple morph knobs will create more possible interactions than if every node was just attached to one knob. I've also sort of split the bands here
into kind of like a low area, a mid area, and then a highs area.
And for each plugin, I have its morph knob mapped to a separate macro in this rack right here. Finally, I have a 4th morph EQ that's just this band with the, oh god, voice crack. The morph mapped to a separate 4th knob and the dry wet mapped to a separate knob as well. To slightly focus our output around a specific frequency. As you might notice, I've also clustered more of the path kind of around the high end here. I want this to occasionally produce like a really dark hat, but not quite as often as I have it produce these kind of brighter hats. And so by clumping more of the path up here, I've effectively just weighted the probability. The one other thing I've done here is I've mapped the scale of, not this one, but these 3 morphs to the same scale knob here, and that's actually excluded from the randomization. This is just a helpful way of controlling how resonant versus how white noisy you want these hats to be. You can randomize this as well if you want to, but I kind of prefer to just set it and forget it. Now, the other big ingredient of this is device randomizer. This is not a stock Max device, but it is free, and it's super, super helpful, so I definitely recommend grabbing this. In the edit menu, as you can see here, I've excluded the scale from the randomization. So when we randomize, it's not going to touch the scale knob. You can already kind of see where we're going with this, but we're not going to be triggering the randomization. We're actually just going to be letting it kind of drift around like this. You can optionally add, if you want these to be even more resonant and less white noisy, a parallel instance of soothe, kind of set up like this in delta mode, importantly, and then you blend that with the dry signal. So just the soothe is going to sound like this. And you can sort of do a crude dry wet thing by just balancing these two against each other. Finally, we're just going to be low passing everything. We're just going to be high passing everything under about 400 because I'm just not interested in having that in a hi-hat. And this is just a wideband compressor that's just keeping everything kind of flat. So what we do is you set this up and you just let it run for about, I don't know, a minute or so. And then we're going to render the output. Oh, I should add a Jeopardy music here, even though this is going to be sped up. This just, I guess, due to pure chance, didn't really come out that level, so I'm just going to compress it again. Cool. Now we're going to throw this into a drum sampler where we've got a few macros set up. The most important one is just the start time, because the idea of generating this whole long audio file is that each sort of moment of it has a unique, distinct pattern of resonances and peaks and valleys, and you can get a whole lot of variety of hats out of there. But I have a few other parameters set up here to get randomized. I'll show you the ranges right there. I also add a little compressor afterward just to get the output a little bit more stabby, I guess. But basically, once you're at this point, all you do is you can key map this randomized key to something that you're not really using, like say Q, and then if you turn the computer keyboard on, you just sort of mash Q and A. And you have like a billion different hats in here. And the other thing that's nice about this approach is that if you like a hi-hat, you can kind of just, like, let's say we got one here that's cool. Nope. Sure. If you move the start a little bit, you'll get kind of like a... You can get different, like, variations on that hi-hat. Now, from here, you can just, you know... Until you like one, then you render it and move on. But if you're ultra lazy like me, there's an even kind of faster way to do this. I'm stupid. I had this excluded from randomization by accident. You can generate about 100 of these. We'll say that's enough. Drag out this whole piece of audio here. And you can run this through Reaper or Pro Tools or any other program that has like a transient splitting function, and then render out each of these individual hits as a separate audio file. And then you've got, 68 or however many individually split out hi-hats. Now, occasionally this method will produce kind of multiple somewhat redundant one-shots just by pure chance, but there's a pretty easy way to deal with this. If you apply like a temporary tag to just every single file you just generated and then use the similarity search, you can just kind of skim through what you've got so far and just like bounce around to different ones. Like, we don't need both of those. And you don't have to literally check every single file against every single file, but in my experience, if you just sort of do this for about like 5 or 10 minutes, you can pretty easily whittle it down to just sort of the essential kind of ones you're actually looking for. Now, that's just kind of the bread and butter of it. The beauty of this is that you can kind of feed whatever you want into a drum sampler, and as long as it has a hi-hat shaped envelope and is vaguely resonant and vaguely white noisy, it will sound like a hi-hat. So, up here we were just sort of doing the most like bare bones, just pure filtration kind of thing, but you can have a lot of fun with it. For example, I've got this alternate chain down here. No, I don't. I have this alternate chain down here where I've added like erosion, what is this? It's a spectral gate, a spectral delay, and then like I think this is a flanger or a phaser or something. And those are all obviously just getting modulated as well. We can also go into these morphs and alter the paths so that they sort of spend more of the time closer to zero which means that you're more likely to get sort of individual resonances standing up versus a field of them, and that generates a lot more like ceramic-y kind of sounds like this. Ableton's corpus can be really cool because it's kind of made to make resonant bodies anyway. You can obviously add the greatest plugin in the world. And in any case, what you're going to be doing is just macroing out any parameter that you consider sort of that might be interesting to modulate, and then setting it up with a device randomizer that shouldn't be moving really too fast. I kind of like to keep them around this speed range, if not even slower. But basically the world's your oyster. At this point, it kind of just comes down to what kinds of sounds do you like? What kind of sounds are you trying to make? I think with this approach, I would generally stay away from like time-based effects, because there's kind of no point, since all we're really trying to do is extract like the spectral information from this brick of audio. So a delay is not going to do much unless it's short enough to be like flanging or chorusing or whatever. Distortions I might stay away from too, because they're kind of going to over time revert everything back to white noise by bringing up the volume of the quieter layers. But there's nothing wrong with that either. So like, let's, throw a couple more plugins in here because we're sadists, and then we'll see what the hats coming out of that sound like. If you're piling up a bunch of effects, you can even like add another instance of morph like halfway through the chain, set up a similar thing, or just use a preset, which I do a lot with this kind of thing, and sort of let that fly. And that specific flavor of bullshit is gonna give you something that sounds like this. And obviously the more insane your input gets, the more erratic and sort of sometimes a little not very fucking hi-hat sounding the output's going to be. But that's where the fun part comes, because you can kind of go through it and be like, wow, that was interesting. Wow, this shit sucks, etc., 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 etc. The last thing I'll mention before I close this video out is that you can also, if you want to get a little bit more involved with it, you can layer two of these together, but have one act as the transient and then have the other one act as the body. I have it set up. I'll show you the, these are the ranges of the knobs here. We've got one layer that's doing the transient, and the other one just does the body, and the body's sidechained to the transient, so it kind of swells in behind it. Together that can sound like this. These to me sound a lot more dynamic and not necessarily three-dimensional, but there's something a little bit more, it just adds another axis to them that I really enjoy. But you can kind of do whatever with this. I think that's the beauty of it, is that everybody has different plugins and different sort of habits and sounds they really like, and you can sort of plug those into this, and whatever you get out will be kind of like your own version of it. I don't want to ramble and I don't want this to run on too long. So I will find a way to put all the sounds I made in this video in a sample pack that I'll try to link in the description. Feel free to comment or whatever if you have any questions, need anything clarified. I think this is like pretty straightforward though. And yeah, peace.